The floor was cold, my son's tiny hand colder. I wrapped him tighter in my coat and prayed the airport guards wouldn't notice us. My eyes burned from sleepless nights, but I couldn't close them, not when every sound felt like a threat. The rolling suitcases, the echo of footsteps, the distant clatter of announcements, they all blended into one cruel reminder. I had nowhere to go. He stirred in his sleep, murmuring something about a warm bed. My chest ached. I brushed his hair back and whispered, "Soon, baby. Mama will find us a home soon." But I was lying. The last of my cash was hidden inside my shoe, a few wrinkled bills meant for his next meal. I hadn't eaten in days, but his small stomach came first. Always his, always mine. I thought if we stayed quiet enough, no one would notice us. But then, the light shifted. A shadow stretched over the floor, long and still. I looked up, polished shoes, perfectly tailored pants. A man stood there, silent, his presence slicing through the noise like ice through fog. He wasn't a traveler. His clothes were too neat, his eyes too sharp. He studied us for a moment before speaking, his voice calm, deep, and cold. "Why are you sleeping here?" For a second, I couldn't breathe. My lips trembled, but I forced a smile, the kind you give to people who could ruin your day if they wanted to. "We're just waiting for our flight." He raised an eyebrow. "With no tickets?" His gaze dropped to my scuffed shoes, my child's threadbare socks, the small backpack that carried our entire world. I turned away, pretending not to hear. I'd learned that silence was safer than pity, but he didn't leave. Instead, I heard the faint rustle of fabric. Something warm brushed my shoulder. His jacket, expensive, heavy, now covered my son. I froze. "Don't," I whispered. "You don't have to, I know." He straightened. "But I can't walk away." I wanted to scream that he didn't understand, that kindness always came with a price. I'd seen enough of the world to know no one offered warmth for free. But his eyes, dark and unreadable, didn't carry that smug pity rich people wear when they throw a coin into someone's tragedy. There was something else, a quiet exhaustion, a loneliness I recognized. Still, I didn't trust it. I never trusted anyone anymore. He gestured to the row of empty chairs nearby. "Come sit where it's safer. There's security patrol every hour. You shouldn't stay in the corner." I shook my head. "We'll be fine." His jaw tightened slightly. "You're not fine." The truth stung because it was obvious. My throat closed. "Please, just leave us alone." He studied me for a moment longer, then sighed, a slow exhale that sounded like disappointment, not irritation. Then quietly, he walked away. The air felt colder once he was gone. I pulled his jacket tighter around my son, hating how soft it was, hating that it smelled like cedar and something heartbreakingly safe. Hours passed. The lights flickered overhead, and the night dragged on. I tried to stay awake, but exhaustion won. When my eyes finally closed, I dreamed of things I used to have: a small apartment, the scent of baby shampoo, laughter echoing off cracked walls. Before the eviction, before everything fell apart, a hand on my shoulder jolted me awake. I gasped and sat up. It was him again. "You were shivering," he said quietly. The temperature dropped. I didn't know whether to thank him or run. My son stirred beside me, blinking up at the stranger. "Mommy, who's that?" Before I could answer, the man crouched down, his voice softening in a way that made my heart ache. "Someone who doesn't want you to catch a cold." I hated that he could sound so gentle. He reached into his coat pocket and held out a paper cup. Steam curled from it, hot chocolate. "For him," he said simply. My son's eyes widened. He looked at me for permission, but I couldn't speak. My throat was tight. The man placed the cup near my son's hands, careful not to touch either of us. "You can throw it away if you don't trust it," he murmured. But I couldn't just stand there. And then he walked off again. I stared after him, torn between gratitude and suspicion. His silhouette disappeared into the bright terminal lights, swallowed by motion and noise. My son sipped the drink carefully, a small smile breaking through the dirt on his face. "It's sweet, Mommy." I watched him drink, and tears I didn't allow myself to shed slipped free anyway. Maybe I was tired. Maybe I was breaking. Maybe both. "Thank you," I whispered to no one. The next morning, the airport came alive with movement. The floor hummed beneath rolling luggage, and I woke to the sound of heels clicking nearby. The jacket still covered my son. I folded it carefully, debating whether to leave it or try to find its owner. But something told me he'd be gone long before I could return it. Still, when I looked up, he was there, standing across the terminal, talking to someone in a dark suit. He looked like he didn't belong in this world of ordinary exhaustion, and when his gaze met mine, something flickered. Recognition? Curiosity? I couldn't tell. He walked toward us, and for a moment, panic rose inside me. I didn't want another conversation. I didn't want to owe anyone anything. You're still here, he said, voice even. No flight? I clenched the folded jacket against my chest. I told you, we're waiting. He studied me again, slower this time. For how long? My jaw trembled. Until I find a place that will let me stay. Silence. Then, in a tone that felt both kind and dangerous, he said, there's no dignity in freezing to death. I'm not asking for help. I didn't offer charity. His voice deepened slightly. I offered warmth. There's a difference. I hated that he sounded right. He looked down at my son, then back at me. At least let me drive you somewhere safe. A hotel, shelter, anything but this. I shook my head, too proud, too scared. I don't even know your name. He almost smiled, just a shadow of one. That's fine. You don't need it yet. He turned away, then paused and added, but I know yours. My heart stopped. He pointed at the small name tag still pinned to my old backpack, faded from years of use. My Lynn, he said softly. That's you, right? I swallowed hard. How do you? But he didn't answer. Instead, he walked back to his sleek car parked outside the glass doors, leaving me staring after him, confused and wary. As I watched the taillights fade, something inside me twisted, fear, curiosity, maybe both. I had no idea that our lives had just collided for a reason neither of us could escape. Hours later, as night fell again, a folded note slipped under my arm where I slept. Just one line, written in neat, deliberate handwriting. Don't thank me yet. You might regret meeting me. Morning sunlight spilled through the airport windows, painting golden streaks across the tiled floor. I blinked against the brightness, still half dreaming, half dreading reality. My son was curled in my lap, the stranger's jacket draped over him like a borrowed promise. I thought he'd vanished with the night. But when I lifted my gaze, a dark car waited by the curb outside, sleek, silent, patient. The kind of car that didn't belong in my world. And then I saw him. He leaned against the door, talking on a phone, the morning light cutting along the hard lines of his face. He looked the same as last night, sharp suit, cold posture, but daylight made him almost unreal, like a scene from someone else's story. He ended the call and caught my eye. For a heartbeat, we just stared at each other through the glass. Then he gestured, slow and deliberate, as if inviting me to step out of hiding. I wanted to turn away, but my son tugged my sleeve. Mommy, the uncle's here again. Uncle. The word stung. I gathered our things, one worn backpack, one brave little boy, and walked toward him, heart thudding in quiet rebellion. He opened the car door. Get in. The cafeteria food here isn't fit for a child. I hesitated. We'll find something. His gaze slid to the empty vending machines behind me. You won't. There was no warmth in his tone, only certainty. But when I looked down at my son's tired eyes, I caved. Maybe just for breakfast. Maybe for a ride. Maybe because pride couldn't fill a child's stomach. Inside, the car smelled faintly of leather and rain. I'd never been in anything so spotless. The seats felt like clouds compared to the airport floor. My son pressed his nose to the window, whispering in awe. The man sat opposite us, silent, watching the city blur by. His driver said nothing. I could hear the hum of my own heartbeat. Finally, I broke the silence. You didn't have to come back. I didn't plan to. Then why did you? He turned his head slightly, his voice lower. Now, because I couldn't stop thinking about that boy sleeping on concrete. I swallowed, unsure whether to thank him or apologize for existing. He's fine now. We'll get off at the next stop. You won't, he said again, just as calm. I'm taking you somewhere safe. I folded my arms. I don't accept money from strangers. He almost smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Who said anything about money? The car slowed at a small cafe tucked between glass towers. It looked two perfect flowers by the window, soft music drifting out, people who didn't look twice at their meals. He stepped out first, then opened my door like a gentleman from another century. Come on, he said. Your son's shaking. I didn't argue. The smell of bread and coffee hit me as we walked in, and for a moment I forgot the world outside. My son's face lit up when he saw pancakes on the counter. Order whatever you want, the man said to him. I frowned. He can't, but my son was already shyly pointing at the menu, eyes wide. The man nodded at the waiter who hurried off. Watching them felt strange, like a scene I wasn't part of. My son laughed softly when syrup dripped onto his chin. The man handed him a napkin, patient, almost tender. I hadn't expected that. You're good with kids, I muttered. He looked away. I had a niece once. His tone cracked slightly on the last word. Silence again. I traced the rim of my cup, searching for something to say. Finally, he leaned back, studying me. You used to work, didn't you? I stiffened. Why do you think that? Your hands, he said. Calloused, but not rough. Designer, maybe? I froze. The air around me changed. He couldn't know that. Then he said something that made my blood run cold. I've seen your face before. I looked up sharply. Excuse me? He tilted his head, eyes narrowing as if searching old memories. Why do I feel like I failed you once? The words hit me harder than I expected. For a moment, the calf blurred the laughter, the light, all fading behind a wall of sound, failed me. And no one had spoken about my fall like that. Not my former boss, who fired me. Not the landlord who threw us out. Not the man who vanished when I told him I was pregnant. I forced a small laugh, hoping he'd drop it. You must mistake me for someone else. Maybe, he said softly, but his gaze didn't let go. But I rarely forget a face. My heart pounded. Could it be him? The CEO whose signature had been on the termination letter that changed everything. I couldn't look at him anymore. Thank you for breakfast, I said, standing to quickly. We'll be going now. He didn't stop me, just called after me quietly. Keep the jacket. I froze in the doorway. You'll need it again, he said. I wanted to throw it back, but my son clung to it like a blanket. So I nodded once and walked away. Outside, the sunlight was harsh. The city looked too big, too fast, too cruel. My heart was hammering against my ribs. If he really was who I thought he was. Fate had a cruel way of laughing. My son tugged my hand. Mommy, will we see the uncle again? I knelt and kissed his forehead. No, sweetheart. Some people belong to a world far from ours, but as I turned, I saw his reflection in the calf window standing still, watching us leave. And in that moment, I knew this wasn't over. The universe wasn't done with us. Not yet. I used to believe that if you worked hard enough, the world would protect you. I was 25 then, full of quiet dreams and cheap coffee, walking through the glass doors of Lintech Design with a portfolio clutched to my chest and hope heavy in my lungs. That was before I learned how easily a signature could erase a life. Back then, I wasn't the woman sleeping in an airport. I was my Lynn Jr. designer. The girl who stayed late polishing other people's presentations. The one who smiled too often because she wanted to be liked. I remember the office light, that sterile hum of air conditioning, the smell of printer ink. It felt like the center of the universe, and he was the name whispered down every corridor. Mr. Zhao Rui, the CEO no one dared to look at directly. I only saw him twice, once in the elevator, once at the annual meeting, where he congratulated the team for record profits. I remember his voice even now, steady, cold, unhurried. A man who built empires from silence. I never imagined my life would crash under that same silence. When I found out I was pregnant, I was terrified but foolishly happy. My husband then, Chen Wei, promised me the world. You'll see, he said, pressing my hand against my stomach. We'll raise our baby together. You can take a break from work for a while. I believed him. I applied for maternity leave with trembling fingers, worried they'd replace me. My manager smiled too easily and said, "Don't worry, we value family here." 2 weeks later, a company-wide restructuring email went out. My name wasn't on the new staff list. When I called HR, they said my position had been phased out. No explanation, no apology. Just a clean cut, the kind corporate language that bleeds quietly. I went home that day with a folder of unfinished designs and a growing fear inside me. Chen Wei tried to act calm at first. "You'll find something else," he said, though his eyes were already drifting toward his phone. When our savings shrank and my belly grew, his patience thinned. Nights became arguments, arguments became silence, and one morning, he simply didn't come back. I gave birth alone. A hospital blanket, a crying newborn, the sound of rain against the window. I remember whispering, "It's okay, little one. We'll make it." But I didn't know how hard make it could be. I sold everything, my laptop, my jewelry, the ring he'd left behind. I took small design gigs online, anything that could buy diapers and milk. The world shrunk into survival. And yet, I refused to break. I refused to let my son see me as defeated. Every time he smiled, I believed again that light existed somewhere. Years passed in quiet struggle. Then came the eviction notice, the last cruel push that sent us to that airport floor, and now fate had looped back, cruel and poetic. Because when I looked at the man from that night, the stranger who offered warmth without a name, I saw the same stillness. The same voice I'd once heard through office speakers announcing layoffs for efficiency. Zhao Rui.it couldn't be coincidence. The realization hit me while washing my son's hands in the calf restroom that morning. My reflection stared back from the mirror. The same eyes, the same name that had once appeared on a pink slip. I gripped the sink until my knuckles whitened. I wanted to laugh at the absurdity. Of all people to find me, it had to be him. The man whose empire had discarded me like paper waste. I'd imagined confronting him one day, telling him about the nights I went hungry, the humiliation of begging landlords for one more week. But standing before him now, I felt only emptiness. He probably didn't even remember. I was a line item, a decision made over lunch. To him, I was nothing. And yet, his eyes last night, they hadn't been the eyes of a man untouched by guilt. Why did he say, "Why do I feel like I failed you once?" Why did he look at my child with something almost like remorse? I didn't want to know. I couldn't afford to. That afternoon, my son and I sat on a bench outside the caf, watching cars glide past like silver ghosts. He was humming a tune from a cartoon, tapping his tiny shoes together. I smiled for him, though my thoughts were miles away. He looked up suddenly. "Mommy, are you sad?" "No," I lied. "Just thinking about the nice uncle?" I blinked. "What makes you think he's nice?" Because he looked lonely. Children always see what adults try to hide. That night, I couldn't sleep. His jacket still smelled faintly of cedar and something I couldn't name. I stared at the fabric and thought of my old office, of cold mornings and warm dreams. I used to believe success was safety, but maybe safety was simpler. A roof, a full belly, a child's laughter. Still, a question burned quietly inside me. If Zhao Rui was truly that CEO, why help me now? Guilt? Curiosity? Or something else entirely? I didn't have the courage to find out. Not yet. But life has a way of dragging us toward the very things we try to escape. The next evening, as my son and I waited for the airport shuttle, a familiar car pulled up to the curb. The same sleek black sedan, headlights slicing through the fog. The driver stepped out and held the door open. Before I could protest, the rear window rolled down. Zhao Rui sat inside, his expression unreadable. "You left your scarf," he said. I frowned. "I don't own a scarf." He glanced at the folded jacket in my hands. Then maybe I made an excuse. I didn't move. He continued. "I can take you somewhere better. Just for the night. I told you, we'll manage." His gaze softened. "You remind me of someone who once said that. She broke eventually. Then I'll be the exception." He looked at me for a long moment, then nodded slightly as if testing my resolve. "Maybe you will be," he said quietly. "But your son shouldn't have to prove strength he hasn't lived long enough to understand." I had no answer. Only the weight of his words settling between us. Finally, he gestured to the seat beside him. "Come, it's just a roof and a meal. No promises. No pity." I hesitated, heart twisting between pride and desperation. My son tugged my sleeve. "Mommy, please. I'm tired." I looked at his face, then at Zhao Rui. The man whose choices once shattered my world was now offering us shelter. Fate, it seemed, had a dark sense of humor. And maybe, just maybe, mercy were the same face as cruelty. His mansion wasn't what I expected. I thought there would be marble floors, golden chandeliers, and the smell of arrogance in every corner. But instead, the air was still to still and the silence hummed like a secret no one dared to speak aloud. As the car rolled past the gates, my son pressed his face to the window. "Mommy, is this a castle?" I smiled weakly. Maybe for giants who forgot how to smile. Zhao Rui didn't answer. He walked ahead, his stride quiet, his expression unreadable. His house stood tall against the fading light walls of glass, long hallways, and cold silver tones that felt more like a museum than a home. He stopped at the entrance and turned to me. "You can stay here until you find a place. The guest room's upstairs. The boy can sleep there too." I hesitated on the threshold. "We don't belong in a place like this." His eyes softened just slightly. "You don't belong on an airport floor either." I couldn't argue with that. Inside, the air smelled faintly of lavender and rain. My footsteps echoed. It felt wrong to breathe too loudly. Every surface gleamed untouched, as if time itself avoided this place. He called for someone. A woman in her 50s appeared, wearing a neat uniform. "This is Aunt Mai," he said. "She'll help you with whatever you need." The woman smiled kindly, her voice warm where everything else felt cold. "Dinner is ready, sir. Will you join us tonight?" He paused, as though he hadn't been asked that question in years. "Yes," he finally said. That night, we sat at a long dining table meant for 12, though only 3 of us were there. My son swung his legs under the chair, pretending to count the crystal lamps. Zhao Rui sat across from me, barely touching his food, his gaze occasionally drifting toward the child who laughed over mashed potatoes as if it were a feast. For a moment, I almost forgot who he was. After dinner, my son grew sleepy. Aunt Mai led him to bed, leaving me alone in the vast living room. The piano in the corner caught my eye, its keys dusted, untouched. I used to play once, before bills and hunger took the music from me. I ran my fingers over the lid, feeling the cool surface beneath my skin. "Do you play?" I asked without looking up. He stood by the window, the city lights reflecting off his face. "I used to." "What stopped you?" He was quiet for a moment. Silence became easier. I didn't know what to say to that, so I said nothing. Later, as I tucked my son into the guest bed, he whispered, "Mommy, I like it here. Uncle's house smells like rain." I smiled faintly, brushing his hair back. "It's just for a little while, okay?" He nodded, already drifting off. When I stepped into the hallway, I saw Zhao Rui standing by the door, his hands in his pockets. "He's a good kid," he said softly. "He's all I have. You've done well." "He looks happy." I let out a tired laugh. "Happiness is just pretending you're not afraid." He looked at me for a long moment, something unreadable flickering in his eyes. "Then you pretend well." The next few days blurred into quiet routines. He left early every morning, dressed in tailored suits, returning late when the city was already asleep. Aunt Mai cooked warm meals and insisted I eat more. My son filled the silence with his laughter, chasing shadows down marble halls. Sometimes, I caught Zhao Rui watching us from a distance, not intruding, just observing, like a man remembering what it meant to live. One evening, my son insisted I read his favorite bedtime story in the living room. The lights were low, the rain tapping gently against the windows. I sat on the couch, his small head resting against my arm, my voice weaving through the room. Halfway through the story, I realized Zhao Rui was standing behind us. His expression was soft, the kind of softness that comes from memory, not comfort. He listened quietly, hands clasped loosely behind his back. When the story ended, I whispered to my son, "Sleep now." He mumbled something incoherent and dozed off. I lifted him carefully and carried him upstairs. When I came back down, Zhao Rui was still there. "You have a gift," he said, "for reading bedtime stories?" I asked, half smiling, "For turning noise into peace." I looked at him, unsure how to respond. "Maybe it's just a mother's instinct." He shook his head slowly. "No, it's something else." For the first time, his voice wasn't cold. It was almost warm. That night, I stood by my window, staring at the rain outside. I thought about his words, about the way his tone had shifted, almost unwillingly. What did a man like him know of peace or warmth? Maybe he was just lonely. The next morning, I found him in the garden, sleeves rolled up, pouring water over small potted plants. The image startled me. I'd imagined him commanding boardrooms, not tending to roses. He noticed me and gave a faint smile. "Couldn't sleep?" I shook my head. "I didn't think you'd know how to do that." "Watering plants?" Smiling. For a second, the corner of his mouth lifted again, not quite a smile, not quite denial. "It's rarer than it should be." We stood there for a while, listening to the faint hum of bees and wind. Later that day, Aunt Mai whispered as she handed me tea, "He hasn't invited anyone here in years." "Not since." She stopped herself. "Just be kind to him, dear. He's suffered in silence." I wanted to ask, since what? But I didn't. Some wounds don't need strangers' fingers. That night, as I closed my son's door, I heard the faintest sound: the piano. A hesitant note, then another. I crept down the stairs and found him there, seated in the dim light, fingers trembling over the keys. He played a melody that felt like remembering something painful and refusing to let it go. When he finished, he looked up. "Sorry, I didn't mean to wake you." "You didn't," I whispered. He looked at me, really looked for the first time since we met. "You don't realize, do you? His voice was low, almost breaking. Your voice feels like home. I didn't know what to say. The room felt suddenly too small, the air too heavy. So I turned away, pretending not to hear, my heart thudding like a secret trapped beneath my ribs. And as I climbed the stairs, I realized that somewhere between pity and gratitude, something else had begun to grow, something I didn't dare name. The first morning he drove my son to school, I thought I was dreaming. A billionaire in a black suit, standing awkwardly beside a row of parents in worn slippers and oversized hoodies. The image was absurd. But there he was, hair slicked back, holding my son's tiny backpack like it weighed nothing and everything at once. He looked completely out of place. Yet my son beamed, shouting, "Uncle Rui, you came." Before running into his arms, something inside me twisted. It had been so long since anyone looked at my child with that kind of warmth, as if he mattered. When they returned that afternoon, I saw it. The way my son skipped beside him, telling stories that made Rui laugh under his breath. The kind of laugh that startled even him. From that day on, mornings changed. The once silent mansion now echoed with cereal bowls clinking and sneakers squeaking down marble floors. Aunt Mai hummed while making breakfast, and Rui, the man whose name once struck fear in boardrooms, stood in the kitchen flipping pancakes badly, his sleeves rolled up, pretending not to care when my son giggled at his crooked ones. "Don't encourage him," I said, trying not to smile. "Too late," he replied, eyes glinting with something playful, something dangerously human. I'd never seen him like that before, unguarded, real. But even as laughter filled the house, I couldn't stop the whisper in my mind. "This isn't ours. We're guests." Guests leave at tea night. When the lights dimmed, that truth wrapped around me like cold air. I told myself I had to start looking for work again. I'd rebuild my life properly this time, without leaning on anyone, especially him. Still, every time I tried to leave, something pulled me back. Like the evening I found him sitting alone in the study, the glow of a single lamp falling over scattered papers. His hand rested on a framed photograph, a woman with gentle eyes and a smile that looked like summer. I hesitated at the doorway. "Your wife?" He looked up slowly. Was. The silence that followed felt sacred, like a moment you're afraid to breathe in. "She died?" I asked softly. He nodded once. 3 years ago. Car accident." His voice was calm, but his eyes told a different story, one of nights without sleep, of grief that never learned to fade. Since then, this house has been just walls. I didn't know what to say. Words felt too small. So I walked in, placed a cup of tea beside him, and whispered, "Walls can remember warmth if you let them." He stared at me for a moment, as if trying to decide whether to believe that. Then he gave a faint smile, fragile but real. "Maybe you're right." From that night, something shifted quietly between us. He started coming home earlier. Sometimes he'd sit with us while my son drew stick figures on scrap paper. Other times, I'd catch him standing by the kitchen doorway, pretending to check emails while listening to my son's endless stories about school. And once, when I burned dinner, he didn't scold or tease. He simply ordered takeout and told me, "Even emperors make mistakes." I laughed. "You're no emperor." He looked at me sideways. "No, I'm just a man who finally likes the sound of laughter in his house." I didn't realize how dangerous that sounded until later, when the world outside his gates decided to notice us. It began with whispers. The neighbors, the staff, the subtle stares that followed us whenever we went out together. The sight of Rui carrying my son's backpack spread faster than fire. Then one morning, Aunt Mai pulled me aside. Her voice trembled. "They're talking, dear, about you and him." I blinked. "Talking? About what?" "That you've replaced her. That you're after his money." The words sliced through me. My hands went cold. When he came home that evening, I tried to bring it up. "You should stop helping us so much. People are starting to." He cut me off gently. "People will always talk. It could ruin your reputation." He set his briefcase down, looked straight into my eyes, and said quietly, "And what reputation is worth keeping if I have to be alone to protect it?" I didn't answer. His voice carried a weight I couldn't fight, the sound of a man who had already lost everything once. Still, I began to pack that night. Not because I wanted to leave, but because I was afraid of what staying meant. I folded my son's clothes carefully, each shirt holding the scent of safety, each small sock a memory of laughter. But then I heard footsteps behind me. "You're running again," he said softly. I turned, startled. "I'm being practical." He shook his head. You're being scared. Of what? I snapped. Of kindness. That silence after his words was unbearable. I wanted to deny it, but tears betrayed me first. He stepped closer, stopping just short of touching me. You've been alone too long, he whispered. You don't have to keep fighting ghosts that aren't here anymore. I swallowed hard. You don't understand. I do, he said quietly. Because I was one of those ghosts. I looked up at him then, truly looked. For the first time, I didn't see the man who fired hundreds, or the CEO whose decisions had broken lives. I saw someone who'd been living in an empty house, punishing himself for something that could never be undone, and maybe, without realizing it, I had become the reminder. He didn't know he needed proof that even ruins can bloom again. A faint sound interrupted us. My son's sleepy voice from the doorway. Mommy, can I sleep in Uncle's room tonight? The thunder's too loud. Zhao Rui smiled gently. Come here, little one. My son ran into his arms without hesitation. He carried him to the couch, pulling a blanket over both of them. My child's head rested against his chest, small hand clutching his shirt. I stood there, watching them breathe in sync. The man who once represented everything I hated now held everything I loved most. And somehow, I wasn't afraid. Aunt Mai appeared beside me, whispering with a soft tremor. Sir hasn't smiled like that since she died. My heart caught in my throat. Maybe fate wasn't cruel after all. Maybe it was just waiting for both of us to be ready. It began with a flash, then another, then the sound of voices shouting our names through the iron gates. At first, I thought it was thunder again. But when I opened the curtains, I saw the truth. A sea of reporters, cameras glinting like knives, headlines already screaming across glowing screens. CEO's secret family exposed. My stomach dropped. By the time Zhao Rui came downstairs, the world outside was already on fire. His phone wouldn't stop ringing. The air in the house felt different, sharp, electric, dangerous. Aunt Mai rushed toward me, panic etched into her face. They say you and the child are. I know, I whispered. My son clung to my leg, frightened by the chaos. He didn't understand words like scandal or expose, but he felt fear the way children always do. Zhao Rui took the phone from his ear and looked at me, his expression calm but unreadable. Don't open the door, no matter what they say. Who told them? I asked. He exhaled slowly. Someone inside the company. Maybe a shareholder. Maybe all of them. The cameras outside flashed again, and I saw my reflection in the window, tired eyes, trembling hands, and the child in my arms. It looked like guilt even when it was n single quotes By noon. The story had spread everywhere. Widowed CEO shelters single mother and child. Secret affair? Hidden family? Each headline sharper than the last. I wanted to disappear. When I turned on my phone, messages flooded in. Former colleagues, neighbors, people I hadn't spoken to in years, all asking if it was true. Was I really living with him? Had I trapped him? Was the child his? The cruelty of strangers has no pause button. I turned the phone off and pressed it to my chest, shaking. I need to leave, I whispered. You won't, Zhao Rui said firmly. I can't stay and ruin you. He looked at me, his gaze steady. You think this is the first time people have tried to ruin me? This time, it's different. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. Then let it be different. Let me handle it. But I could see the storm building behind his calm. The company would not stay silent. The board would not forgive him for scandal. That evening, he received a call. He didn't answer, but the message came through loud enough for me to hear. Either end this story or step down. I sat on the couch, heart pounding. They're serious, aren't they? He nodded. They think love is weakness. They always have. Then don't lose everything because of us, I said. We can go tonight. He turned to me then, eyes dark and certain. And teach your son what? That kindness needs permission? I didn't know how to respond. His words left me raw. Outside, the reporters didn't sleep. Cameras watched even through the night. My son cried whenever someone shouted my name. Aunt Mai closed the curtains and held him close, whispering prayers under her breath. By morning, things got worse. The headlines twisted again. Woman fired by CEO returns as lover. They dug up my past, my dismissal from Lintech, my failed marriage, my eviction. Every humiliation laid bare for the world to devour. I locked myself in the bathroom and sobbed quietly, one hand pressed to the mirror. I could barely recognize my reflection. When I came out, Zhao Rui was waiting. Pack a small bag, he said. I froze. Are we leaving? No, his jaw was set. We're facing it. He led me and my son into the car, straight past the photographers. The flashes burned like lightning. He didn't flinch. Neither did I. The car stopped at his headquarters, the towering glass building where I once walked as an invisible employee. Now every pair of eyes turned to me as we entered. The whispers followed like smoke. He guided me through the lobby, his hand steady at my back. Don't look down, he murmured. In the boardroom, the air was ice. Men in suits sat around the long table, faces tight with judgment. One of them sneered, "You're turning our company into a circus." Another added, "You should have kept your charity private." Zhao, he stood at the head of the table, calm but unyielding. "You call compassion a scandal. I call it being human." They laughed bitterly. "You're risking billions over a woman you barely know." He met their eyes, voice steady. "She's not a mistake. She's the reason I remembered what living feels like." The room went silent. I couldn't breathe. His words didn't sound rehearsed. They sounded like truth. Then he turned slightly toward me. "If anyone here doubts my ability to lead, I'll prove it tomorrow. But today, I won't apologize for caring." I felt the weight of every stare, but for once, I didn't care. Because for the first time in years, someone had chosen to stand beside me, not out of pity, but out of conviction. The next day, the press conference was broadcast live. He stood before the microphones, crisp suit, calm tone, but fire in his eyes. The reporters shouted questions. "Who is she? Are you in a relationship? Is the child yours?" He waited for silence, then spoke clearly. "She's the woman I should have protected years ago. When the system failed her, I turned away. I'm not doing that again." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Cameras clicked like heartbeats. He continued, voice firm but tender. "That child is not my blood, but he is the reason I wake up with purpose. They saved me from my own emptiness. So, if this is a scandal, then let it be one that teaches grace." I stood at the edge of the crowd, holding my son's hand, tears running silently down my face. He didn't need to defend me, yet he did. He didn't need to speak my name, but somehow, he spoke my heart. When it was over, the world would still gossip, the board would still rage, but something inside me shifted forever. He didn't look like a CEO anymore. He looked like a man freed from his own loneliness. As we left the building, the reporters shouted after him, "Mr. Zhao, are you saying you love her?" He paused at the door, turned just slightly, and said softly, "I don't care what they say. This family saved me first." And in that moment, the noise of the world faded. All that remained was the sound of my heart finally, quietly, believing again. The storm didn't pass, it changed shape. A week after the press conference, Zhao Rui's empire began to tremble. It started with a meeting request marked urgent, then 3 more that same morning. Investors withdrew, partners called in their lawyers, and headlines multiplied like shadows. Zhao Group faces leadership crisis. Board moves to oust CEO amid scandal. The house that had once been silent with loneliness now buzzed with chaos. Phones rang without rest. Aunt Mai turned away reporters who hid in cars across the street. And through it all, Zhao Rui remained eerily calm, like a man watching his own kingdom burn from a distance. One evening, I found him in the study again, the lights dim, his laptop open but untouched. His tie was gone, his sleeves rolled to his elbows. "Tell me the truth," I said quietly. "Are they forcing you out?" He looked up slowly, exhaustion lining his face. "They're trying. Because of us?" He hesitated. "Because I stopped pretending to be one of them." I walked closer. "You built this company. You can't let them take it." He gave a small bitter laugh. "Do you know what it costs to build something like this, my Lin? Years of missed dinners, birthdays spent in airports, love traded for profit. Maybe it's time I let it go." His words cut through me like ice. "Don't say that. You worked too hard for what?" His voice rose for the first time since I'd met him. "For men who measure worth in numbers and call it legacy?" Silence hung heavy between us. Then softer, almost broken, he said, "You showed me what real value looks like. And it doesn't live in glass towers." I wanted to argue, but his eyes stopped me. They weren't the eyes of a CEO anymore. They were the eyes of a man on the edge of surrender. That night, he received the final blow. The board voted. The motion passed. They demanded his resignation in the best interest of shareholders. He didn't fight. He didn't even speak. He simply stood, adjusted his jacket, and said, "Then I wish you luck keeping the soul I gave this company." When he came home, my son ran to him with open arms. Uncle Rui, did you win? Zhao Rui knelt, pulling him close. His voice was quiet. I won something else. I watched from the doorway, my heart breaking and healing all at once. Later, as the house went dark, I found him sitting on the steps outside, looking up at the night sky. The wind carried the faint smell of rain again. You should have fought, I said softly. He smiled faintly. Maybe fighting isn't always strength. Then what is? Knowing when to walk away. I sat beside him, silent for a while. What will you do now? Nothing, he said simply. For once in my life, absolutely nothing. The words should have sounded tragic. Instead, they sounded free. In the days that followed, he began shedding his old life like an unwanted skin. The tailored suits stayed in their closets. The driver was dismissed with a handshake. The board sent formal letters filled with cold gratitude, which he filed away and read. I tried to help, offering to find work, to repay him somehow, but he just shook his head. You already have, he said. You gave me a reason to wake up. It was strange seeing him like that, barefoot in the garden, hair tousled by the wind, watching my son chase butterflies. Once, this man ruled skyscrapers. Now, he was just human. But freedom came at a cost. Rumors persisted. Former colleagues whispered that I had ruined him, that I was the reason his empire collapsed. One afternoon, when I went to pick up my son from school, another mother stopped me by the gate. Her tone was honeyed with malice. Must be nice, she said, to have a rich man fix your life. I smiled politely, though my hands trembled. He didn't fix my life, I said. He reminded me it still had meaning. That night, I told Zhao Rui about it. He laughed softly. They'll always need a villain to make sense of their envy, but I saw the weariness beneath his smile. He missed his world, even if he hated it. He missed purpose. So I asked, do you regret it? He looked at me for a long time, then shook his head. I've owned everything, he said quietly, except a reason to come home. My breath caught. I couldn't look away. That night, as he tucked my son into bed, I stood at the door listening. Uncle Rui, my son asked sleepily, will you be sad if we go away someday? He hesitated, then said, maybe a little, but I'll be happy knowing you're safe. Then we won't go, my son murmured. Zhao Rui smiled, brushing his hair gently. We'll see, little one. We'll see. When he stepped out, our eyes met in the hallway. Something wordless passed between us, fear, tenderness, surrender. Later, I found him at the piano again, his fingers tracing silent notes. I stood behind him, whispering, you don't have to keep proving you're strong. He looked over his shoulder, his voice barely a breath. I'm not trying to be strong anymore. I'm just trying to be real. For a moment, the world outside ceased to exist. There was no scandal, no boardroom, no wealth or ruin, just two people who'd lost everything and somehow found each other in the wreckage. And though I didn't say it aloud, I realized something then. Sometimes collapse isn't the end. It's the first step toward being free. The mansion was too quiet after he resigned. No more calls at dawn, no footsteps echoing through endless halls, no scent of polished wood and power. Just silence, gentle, complete, unfamiliar. He sold it all within a month. The board didn't believe it at first, but he meant every word. The cars, the shares, the mansion gone. What he kept fit into the suitcases, some books, his mother's old watch, and a small framed photo of my son laughing by the fountain. Where will you go? I asked, my heart trembling even as I tried to sound calm. He looked at me and said something I never expected, wherever peace lives. And that's how we ended up here by the sea. The first morning in the seaside town felt like breathing after years underwater. Waves whispered against the shore. Sunlight spilled through the curtains, and the scent of salt replaced the smell of glass and marble. Zhao Rui rented a small house with peeling paint and a front porch that creaked when you stepped on it. My son called it our noisy house. He opened a bookshop by the pier, a tiny space with crooked shelves and the sound of gulls crying overhead. He named it Second Chapter. I laughed when I saw the sign. You always think in metaphors. He smiled. It's a habit I can't afford to lose. Our days became simple. I helped arrange the shelves while my son drew doodles on sticky notes and stuck them to the counter. Zhao Rui served coffee to locals, listening more than he spoke. Sometimes he'd spend hours reading quietly to my son while I swept the floor. He looked different here. No tailored suits, no steel in his voice, just linen shirts and rolled sleeves, hair tousled by sea wind. The weight he used to carry had melted into something softer, But peace didn't come without ghosts. One evening, as we closed the shop, I caught him staring at the sunset. His expression was far away, wistful. "You miss it," I said gently. He blinked. "Miss what?" "The world you left behind." He was silent for a long time before answering. "I miss who I thought I was in it." I stepped closer. "And who are you now?" He looked at me, then truly looked, as if searching for the answer in my eyes. "A man learning that love doesn't have to be a transaction." My heart ached. "You gave up everything, Rui. For me, for us." He shook his head. "No, my Lin. I gave it up because of me. You just reminded me what I'd forgotten." "What's that?" "That love isn't lost, it's freedom." I didn't realize I was crying until he brushed a tear from my cheek, his touch careful, reverent, but guilt lingered in me like a shadow. I'd watched him fall from power because of our story, and even though he never blamed me, I carried that blame like an invisible chain. Some nights, when he was asleep, I'd walk to the porch and stare at the waves, wondering if I'd stolen his life's meaning. One night, he found me there. "You still think you ruined me," he said quietly, leaning against the doorway. I turned away. "You lost everything you worked for." He stepped closer, the sea breeze tugging at his shirt. "You think I built all that for joy? I built it to forget I didn't have any." I swallowed hard. "But you had everything." He shook his head. "I had control, not happiness." I wanted to argue, but the waves drowned my words. He came closer until his breath was warm against my ear. "You gave me back what power stole meaning." I turned toward him then, and for a moment, we stood between silence and something deeper than words. His eyes held no arrogance, no cold distance, only the quiet certainty of a man who'd found home in something fragile and real. The next morning, my son ran into the shop holding a small seashell. "Look, Uncle Rui. It's like a heart." Xiao Rui crouched to examine it, smiling. "Then we'll keep it here," he said, placing it beside the register. A reminder that even broken things can still be beautiful. I watched him with my son and felt that ache against soft, grateful, overwhelming. In the afternoons, we'd close the shop early and walk to the beach. My son would chase waves while Xiao Rui and I sat in the sand, our shoulders barely touching. We didn't need words anymore. The rhythm of the ocean said everything. One evening, as the sun dipped low, he said quietly, "You ever think about how strange it is? You lost everything and found me. I lost everything and found you." I smiled faintly. "Maybe that's how fate works, to broken pieces that finally fit." He looked at me for a long moment, then said something that would stay with me forever. "I was lonely in palaces," he murmured. "Now I'm rich in sunlight." For the first time, I understood. He hadn't fallen. He'd chosen to rise differently. The world could keep its power, its numbers, its noise. We had peace, laughter, the smell of salt, the warmth of mornings that didn't demand perfection. And as I watched him lift my son into the air, both of them laughing under the orange sky, I realized something simple and sacred: we hadn't escaped the world. We'd built a smaller, truer one. Spring came quietly to the seaside town. The air softened, the sea turned gentle, and wildflowers began to bloom along the cliffs. Every morning, sunlight poured through the window of second chapter, painting the shelves in gold. My son had grown taller. His laughter carried further. And Xiao Rui, he no longer looked like the man who once ruled skyscrapers. He looked like someone who finally knew peace. Life settled into a rhythm. Warm, slow, human. We opened the shop at 9, served coffee and stories, and closed when the horizon blushed pink. The locals had stopped whispering about us. To them, we weren't a scandal anymore. We were just a family. Sometimes, though, I'd catch him watching the waves from the window, lost in thought. There was a softness in his gaze that hadn't been there before, a quiet gratitude mixed with something deeper, something waiting. One evening, he said, "The sea's teaching me patience." I smiled. "And what lesson is that?" "That peace isn't a reward. It's a decision you make every day." His words lingered in the air like a promise. That weekend, he closed the shop early. "Come to the beach," he said, a hint of nervousness in his voice. "Bring the boy." The sun was setting when we arrived, that kind of golden hour where everything looked dipped in honey. My son ran ahead, chasing seagulls and laughter, his joy echoing against the tide. Xiao Rui stood a few steps away from the water, barefoot, trousers rolled up, the wind tugging at his hair. He turned when he saw me, and something in his eyes made my heart still. "Do you remember the night I found you?" he asked softly. How could I forget? You were holding him in your arms, shivering, praying no one would see you. He took a slow breath. I didn't realize then that I was the one who needed saving. My throat tightened. Rui. He smiled faintly. You showed me what love really is. Not possession. Not perfection. Just staying. He knelt suddenly, the sand sinking beneath his knees. My son came running, giggling when he saw the small velvet box in Zhao Rui's hand. Mommy, look. Uncle Rui found a treasure. Zhao Rui opened the box. Inside, the ring caught the dying sunlight, simple, silver, elegant, nothing like the grand gestures of his old life. My breath caught. Rui, you don't have to, I do, he said firmly, his voice trembling just enough to be human. I've spent years owning things. Now I want to belong. Tears blurred my vision. You're sure? After everything? He reached for my hand. I'm sure because of everything. Then he looked at my son. Can I ask you something, little one? My boy tilted his head. What is it? May I be your family? For a moment, the world seemed to stop. The waves, the wind, even the gulls. And then my son's face lit up like sunrise. Yes, he shouted, before I could even breathe. Mommy, say yes. I laughed through tears, covering my mouth with both hands. Zhao Rui's eyes glistened, his expression breaking into something I'd never seen before, pure joy. I knelt down with them, my hands shaking as I whispered, You really want this? A life with us? He nodded, his voice barely above the sound of the waves. You were the only life I ever wanted. The ring slipped onto my finger like it had been waiting all this time. The wind carried the scent of salt and wildflowers. The waves lapped softly against the shore, and my son wrapped his little arms around both of us. We stayed there for a long time, 3 silhouettes against the fading light, the sky bleeding into shades of gold and violet. He kissed my forehead gently. You once said happiness is pretending you're not afraid. Maybe it's time to stop pretending. I smiled, tears glistening in the corners of my eyes. Then what is it? He brushed a strand of hair behind my ear. It's when fear becomes smaller than love. For the first time in years, I felt whole. Not because life was perfect, but because it finally made sense. That night, back at the little house, my son fell asleep clutching the ring box like a secret treasure. I stood by the window, watching the reflection of the moon ripple across the sea. Zhao Rui came up behind me, wrapping his arms around my waist. Do you ever miss it? I whispered. The city, the noise, the power? He rested his chin on my shoulder. Sometimes. But then I hear you breathe beside me, and I remember what silence is supposed to sound like. I turned in his arms, resting my head against his chest. We've come so far. He nodded, voice low. And yet, it feels like we just began. Outside, the waves rolled softly against the shore. The same sea that once symbolized his escape now carried our laughter back to the stars. As I closed my eyes, I realized something simple and beautiful. Love doesn't arrive when you're ready for it. It finds you when you're broken enough to understand it, and when it does, it doesn't ask for anything, it simply stays. Sometimes, love doesn't knock, it finds you where you've fallen. Tonight, the waves are whispering again, the same way they did the first night we came to this town. My son is asleep in his room, the faint sound of his breathing steady through the wall. And beside me, Zhao Rui lies quietly, his hand resting over mine, our fingers loosely entwined. The sea breeze drifts through the open window, carrying the scent of salt and jasmine. I still write in this diary because I never want to forget how far we've come from that cold airport floor to this quiet home by the ocean. I used to think my story was about survival, but now I know it was about rediscovery, of love, of dignity, of self. Sometimes when I close my eyes, I see that younger version of me, the girl clutching her child beneath the flickering airport lights, afraid to hope, ashamed to need help. I want to tell her that she'll make it. That one day, the same world that broke her will give her back a reason to believe. I want to tell her that the man whose shadow once frightened her would one day be the one who held her steady in the light. Life is strange that way, how it leads you through heartbreak just to teach you the shape of compassion. Zhao Rui isn't the man I first met. The world stripped him of his armor, and somehow in losing everything, he found what truly mattered. He found us. He still runs the bookshop, though he lets my son manage the counter with stickers and seashells. Sometimes I watch them together, the two people who changed the meaning of my existence. My boy's laughter still fills the air, and Zhao Rui's quiet smile still steadies me like sunlight through storm clouds. He says I saved him, but the truth is, he taught me what love looks like when it's gentle, when it doesn't demand, when it simply stays. I've learned that love isn't a rescue, it's a meeting place between two broken hearts that choose to heal together. If you'd told me years ago that I'd end up here writing from a seaside window, wearing a ring that glows faintly in the moonlight, I would have laughed through my tears. But life has a way of softening even the sharpest edges. When you keep walking, even barefoot, even bleeding, the world outside still whispers about us sometimes. The scandal that became a story of redemption, but we stopped listening long ago. The noise faded, and what remained was ours alone. The sound of a boy's laughter, a man's quiet strength, and the steady rhythm of love that asks for nothing but presence. I've stopped running from the past, because I finally understand, it wasn't my punishment. It was my preparation. The woman who lost everything had to die, so this one, this peaceful, grounded, grateful version of me could live. Tonight, as the tide rises, I whisper a silent prayer, not for more, but for gratitude, for the kindness that appeared when I least deserved it, for the hands that lifted me without asking for repayment, and for the heart that saw beauty in my ruins. Jaurua stirs beside me, half asleep, his voice soft. You're writing again? I smile. Just finishing our story. He opens his eyes, his expression tender. Then don't end it. Leave space for what comes next. I close the diary, resting it on the bedside table. I will, I whisper, because stories like ours don't end. They just breathe. Outside, the moon hangs low over the sea, silver light rippling across the waves. Somewhere in that sound, I hear the echo of who we were, lost souls who met by accident, held together by compassion, and stayed together because of love. That was my story. If you've ever found kindness when you least deserved it, maybe it was love in disguise. And maybe, just maybe, that love was waiting all along, right where your heart had fallen.